Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you on a Tuesday. Glad to be taking your calls as well. It's the Radio Northwest Network serving the states of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. And while there's a lot of national news to talk about, I do want to talk about some issues here in the Northwest. And I think few are bigger financially and otherwise than the plan, probably failed by this point, to replace the Interstate Bridge, which is one of the big choke points on Interstate 5, one of our major American interstate freeways that goes all the way from Canada to Mexico along the West Coast. And one of its biggest problem spots is that old bridge that crosses the Columbia River. John Lee is both a reporter, retired airline pilot, candidate for the Washington House of Representatives, District 18 position 2, and a guy who's followed this thing and is on this all day long. Hey, John, welcome back.
Hi, Lars. Thanks so much for the opportunity to chat today. And you're exactly right. We're talking about the largest public works project in the Portland history, and it's an unbelievable waste of taxpayer money.
And in fact, I mean, unless you consider Sound Transit in the Puget Sound area, this is one of the biggest public works projects anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, isn't it?
Exactly right. And on Friday, they announced the federal government's giving $1.5 billion to the project, which brings the total up to $2.1 billion. And it's a project without a final design. It doesn't have Coast Guard approval. They don't have an environmental impact statement, and we don't even know what the updated cost estimate is. It shows how poorly the federal government uses taxpayer money and oversees projects.
They're throwing money around. And John, I want to say this just to get it on the record. My personal theory is the only reason they're pushing this project right now, well, two reasons. One, there are a bunch of people who want light rail, not the citizens of Washington, not the citizens of Oregon, but there are people in positions of power that want light rail. But the second reason is this, John, and you correct me if I'm wrong. They spent almost $200 million on the last failed attempt to replace that bridge. And part of the rules from the feds were, if you take that money and if you spend it and you don't build the bridge, unless you get the project going again by a certain time, which I think was September of last year, you have to pay that money back and no more money will be coming. Am I correct in that?
You are correct, and there's an asterisk in that every project that's submitted to the federal government has a no-build option. And you can simply choose the no-build option and therefore avoid paying back the money. But no, these people, these bureaucrats, these special interest politicians want a light rail project, and that is the whole mathematical aspect of keeping Trimet alive and funneling money to keep them going. And now, if you look at the reality of this, they spent over $200 million a decade ago. They've already spent over $100 million now, and one estimate shows they have obligated up to another $200 million. If you're looking at $300 to $400 million, that would have paid for the bridge itself.
Yep.
This is an unbelievable waste of the people's money.
And by the way, they don't know where they're going to get the rest of the money. Even the people who've, the members of Congress who've said, well, we're going to get Perez and Wyden, Perez from Washington, member of Congress, Wyden, senator from New York City, but he pretends to represent Oregon. They've said, we want to get this federal money and not have tolling because they know how very unpopular tolling is. And yet, is there any other way to raise the as much as $9 billion that this thing is going to cost?
Absolutely not. Oregon's broke transportation funding-wise,
Yep.
and Washington has so many other obligations and needs for their money, coupled with the reality that they're about to lose at the ballot box their $2 billion worth of the Climate Commitment Act funding. And so the only place they logically can go is tolling in order to raise additional money. And of course, as you and I have talked about many times, over 80% of Portland area residents absolutely object to tolling, and there's no need to do it. If you eliminated the $2 billion light rail project, you'd cut the project cost down to around $4 billion, which is still way too much, but then you wouldn't need tolling on it. You could use the $4.1 billion that's already been allocated and build a project. And of course, what's really needed is something simpler. You and I also talked about the fact that both states are building a bridge in Hood River for $520 million or billion dollars. No, $520 million.
Yep.
And that shows the huge waste of money on this. We don't need to spend 15 times that much on a bridge that adds no capacity and provides no congestion relief.
Okay, you've nailed this down, and I want you to back me up on this. So just follow me along, John, because you can find John's reporting at Clark County today. But if I want to collect $1 in gasoline taxes, what is the cost of collecting that dollar?
About 1 cent.
About 1 penny. Now, if I want to collect $1 of tolling money, is the cost of collecting that dollar as much as 70 cents just to put it in the project?
Exactly right. It's outrageous. And even in ODOT, the Oregon Department of Transportation, for their initial tolling study on I-205, they were saying 83 to 86% cost of collection.
So it may, to get 14 cents in the budget for the bridge, you have to spend 86 cents to collect the 14 cents that actually goes into the bridge.
Yeah, and of course, that's an anomaly. Generally speaking, you're looking at a low of 20% cost of collection up to a high of 68% in Washington state to collect those tolls. But you and I know no private business would use a credit card that charged them 20 to 68% in order to pay for anything. It's a huge, ridiculous way to fund it.
Do you think the end of the day kind of figure is probably right between 20 and 70, or is it toward one end or the other?
We truly don't know. My guess is if you shot in the middle and said 35 to 40%, that's probably where the bureaucrats will try to get this. But we don't know. Oregon has zero experience collecting tolls, and WashDOT's record is very spotty at best. You and I also talked about the fact that for 5 different occasions, the Washington legislature has had to bail out the Tacoma's Narrows Bridge tolling project because people are in an outrage over the cost of the tolling there. And so the Washington legislature has spent $130 million instead of relying on tolling, all of which paints a picture of tolling's a very unreliable source of funding transportation.
Well, and not only that, John, but I'm a big believer. When Tina and I used to own a boat, we had a sailboat and we had a powerboat at one point. When we paid our boat fees, they all went to boating, activities like boat ramps and pump outs and bathrooms and things like that. If you want to use a snow park permit in either state, you want those parking lots cleared in the wintertime, the people who use them pay for it. And I think the people who use the bridge, which would include me, should pay for it. Can you imagine going to the state legislature and saying, we'd like people in Spokane and Republic, Washington, and we'd like people in Ashland, and we'd like people in Klamath Falls to pay for a bridge that they literally never drive across?
Yeah, it's ridiculous on so many areas. And a different aspect of this whole project you and I talked about a few weeks ago was that 54% of the bridge space is dedicated to transit, pedestrians, and bikes. Only 46% goes to cars and our freight haulers. And they want the cars and the freight haulers to pay for all that free space that the transit, pedestrians, and bikes are going to use. And that means increased tolling so that bikes, pedestrians, and transits can cross for free. That's an absolute outrage.
Unbelievable. That's John Lee. You can find his reporting at Clark County today. Coming up in just a